Podcasters Roundtable, Round 30, Growing Your Audience, which is the short version of the real title of this round. Because what this is, well, it's us doing something different once again. It's fun to experiment with this show. We do different times and different days. And fortunately, Google has been kind enough to let me once again push out to thousands, basically most of the people in my circles. And so I think today we have a good number of audience, a much better, what we used to get in the beginning, and then Google for some reason messed up the invite system, and we're back. So that means more of you are seeing this live, which is great. It's really helpful. The chat room rocks. But if we are, let me pause my live version since I'm getting feedback there. Hear myself back in my ears. That's fun. And but to be sure that you get notified live, go to podcastersroundtable.com and sign up over there, and you'll be notified via email list when we go live. So I push this out to different places, but I can't always guarantee you're going to see it on Google+. The email's a little better. Sometimes I'm a little late on that, but that's what the archive is for, I guess. All right, so what we are doing today is, the actual title is How to Grow Your Audience from Hundreds to Thousands. And this was a presentation, it was a panel that myself, Daniel, and Dave, who you'll be introduced to in a minute, you probably already know. If you've been here for more than one round, you know those guys. But we did this panel together at NMX New Media Expo 2014 back in January, and NMX was kind enough to lose our recording. Actually, I'm not sure quite what happened, and I'm sure it wasn't their fault. These things happen. So we had an idea. Let's redo it here on Podcasters Roundtable. So essentially we had a Podcasters Roundtable at NMX, but a panel discussion about how to grow your audience. So that's what we're doing. We want to get into it. We have, I think I promised over 50 tips about how to sort of do things with your show to help you be discovered by either new people or actually retain the audience you already have. As once you've got them, if you lose them, that's not the way you want to go. So we're going to do that. I'm pretty sure we got 50 tips. It's going to be hard to get through everything. I know we ran, of course, out of time at NMX. It's very hard, but I will stop talking. Let's meet the round table really quick, and we will get into the tips. And first up, Mr. Daniel J. Lewis, co-host Podcasters Roundtable. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I've been excited and busily working on mypodcastreviews.com.
Oh, see, something new, something to look forward to. I think we got a couple new things to look forward to. We'll see how many of those we can tease here in this round. But
and how many times I can promote it.
Yeah, we know. Daniel is a promo master, and so it makes him very suited for this round. So, Dave Jackson, welcome back.
Great to be here. Great to see you, Ray. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com.
Fantastic, short and sweet. Dave's a pro, gets it done. And with a promo. Nice job. All right. So, at this panel, Daniel took lead and organized this thing, and I think we had a pretty successful panel based on the feedback that we got. And I'm going to turn it over to Daniel to start, and we will just get into the tips. And let me say real quick, if you're in the chat and you're watching this live, you can kind of help this presentation. If you see one point that you want us to elaborate on a little bit more, let us know, and we can go a little deeper because we're going to try to get through as many as possible. All right, Daniel.
Yeah, the idea here is growing your audience to help you get to success however you define that. So success for you might be 100 people, it might be 1,000 people, it might be 10,000 people, depending on where you are and where you want to be. But before we can really talk about growing your audience, you need to know what is preventing your audience from growing. Because if you're trying to market crap, then you're not going to find an audience for you because you've got such a horrible product. So three areas of focus for improving your quality to ensure that you're not preventing your podcast from growing. One is the quality of your content. Think about, is your content so good and so exciting that people will want to listen to it and share it with other people? We're going to be talking a lot about word of mouth and how important word of mouth is to promoting your podcast. So keep that in mind. Is your content so good that people who listen to it want to share it with other people.
Yeah, and I think that word of mouth, I think when we were planning this in the background, I kind of said that all of these tips kind of boil back down to word of mouth, at least the biggest, most important ones, I think, because you're going to find out that's a lot of the way people are going to hear about your show, I think. They're going to talk to their friends who also have an interest in what they're interested in, and I think most of these can go back to word of mouth. As I was labeling them sort of word of mouth tips, I just kept putting word of mouth. They all kind of boiled down, so important point.
Yeah, and then look at your presentation quality. If you have great content but really poor presentation, then you're not communicating it well. People won't be able to receive the great content that you're sharing. And then the third area of quality to focus on is your production quality. Because even if you have great content and you have a great skill at presenting that content, but it's very poorly produced, then people can't appreciate the content and your skill in presenting it. So these are three things to focus on, three areas of quality that if you aren't doing these things well, they could be preventing your podcast from growing. Because if you've got horrible content quality, you could get 10,000 people to come to your podcast, and 9,999 of them don't like what you're talking about or don't like the quality of your content, and they'll turn away. So that could have been 10,000 new subscribers, but because your content was horrible or your presentation or your production, it could turn away those people. So first, make sure that your content, your presentation, and your production are as good as they can be.
Awesome. And is that all you're going to hit on those tips?
Yeah.
Okay. Dave, is there something in, because that's sort of three big areas, and we have several little things in there. And Daniel, you may have hit most of those. Dave, is there something out of those three areas that you want to pick out as something that you particularly like for growing your audience?
Well, number one, be excited. If the topics you're talking about are not going to excite you, they're not going to excite your audience. In terms of production quality, stay away from Blog Talk Radio. If you've listened to my show, you know how I feel about that. So that would be, to keep it quick and simple, that would be my quick tips for that.
And
Dave is excited about you not using Blog Talk Radio.
Yes, he will tell you very passionately, and you will buy into what he's saying just based on his enthusiasm. So be excited. Right. And now let me give you a tip. If you want to, we're kind of following an outline that's on podcastersroundtable.com/NMX14 if you want to follow along there. But also later on, if you want to go back, this outline is already there. The recording was going to be there. We didn't get it, so we're doing it now, and it will get posted to that same URL. But that is actually the list we are kind of looking at right now. All right, let's move on. We've got passive SEO, iTunes and your website, done once, move on. Daniel, you want to explain a little bit what we got here?
Yeah, your SEO is how people find you. And don't think of SEO as if you build it, they will come. But think of it as how can you make yourself findable for those people who are looking for the kind of content that you can provide. So the most important parts of your SEO are things that you pretty much do just once. You don't have to constantly maintain things. But the most important things, both first and ongoing, is your title for your show and your title for your episodes. Those are the two most searchable items in iTunes. Secondary and tertiary to those are your artist tags and your descriptions. Your keywords don't matter, but your titles are the most important thing. So focus on making those good and having those keywords that you want. And that's a kind of passive technique for growing your audience.
What's the common mistake people make in their titles? So let's say iTunes.
Using a cute title. Like one of my own podcasts, for example. It's a cute title, and people see it and they think, oh, that's cute. Well, that title by itself tells you nothing about what the podcast is for, and very few people go to iTunes and search for The Ramen Noodle. So a couple of years ago, I changed it to The Ramen Noodle Clean Comedy Podcast. So when people search for comedy podcast or clean comedy podcast, then I appear in the list. And they know, just from adjusting the title a little bit, they know more about what the podcast is about.
Yeah, and go ahead, Dave.
Well, I can chime in. I originally called my podcast The Morning Announcements because I was being cute because it's the school of podcasting. But I always tell people the test is tell somebody, here's the name of my podcast. What do you think it's about? And I had a friend of mine whose podcast was Life After Blindness. Well, he was originally going to call it After the Darkness. So he asked some people, what do you think After the Darkness would be about? And somebody said, isn't it a band from the 80s? And somebody else. And so finally I said, well, what's your podcast about? And he said, Life After Blindness. And I go, why don't we call it Life After Blindness? And everybody immediately knows what that's about. So make it obvious.
Brilliant.
Now there are things you can do. What if you have a podcast, it's a cute title. What do you do in that case? How do you amend that? I'm kind of referring to how important is the description box that's underneath your title in iTunes, and maybe even how you fix it with that title itself. And what I'm saying here is, if you look at mine, it says, I think, the Podcasters Studio or Podcasters Roundtable, probably with Ray Ortega dash a podcast about podcasting, right? So I'm getting all the keywords in there without really changing the title of the show. It's just how it titles in iTunes, which we know is important for search.
Right, and that's like what I did with the Ramen Noodle. It's called the Ramen Noodle Clean Comedy Podcast. That's its full name in iTunes. Right. So it has those keywords in the title without completely changing the title. So I can still be cute, but I have other good keywords in there.
Yeah,
it's almost like a subtitle.
Yeah, kind of like a subtitle. Okay, but it's important to get it in your actual title in iTunes because that's what is searchable.
Yeah, I know Rob from Libsyn. There was a podcast about a TV show, and it was very inside baseball kind of name that if you knew the show, you understood it, but the title made no sense. And he put the name of the show in his title along with unofficial podcast, and he said immediately jumped up to one of the top 3 on that show. But it wasn't getting found because nobody knew the inside joke to look for it.
All right, we've already bogged ourselves down, so let's get moving. What else did we say in Passive SEO? Did you talk about lack of show notes?
Lack of show notes. No, we did not. Obviously, Google is going to help bring people to your site, and I've seen people literally type 15 to 20 words and call it show notes. And granted, those are show notes, but the more you type, the better the chance that you're going to be found. So we kind of recommend. We looked at a bunch of different people: Micah Hyatt, Michael Stelzner, and Copyblogger, and people that are really popular bloggers. And those people are, putting out 700 words, 1,000-word essays. And I know the one WordPress SEO plugin says you should do at least 300 words. So it's one of those things we hate to do because many times we're doing show notes last, but if you don't put any kind of show notes, that could maybe stop you from being found.
Right.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
A transcription is not necessarily the good way to go because Google is becoming more human and it's prioritizing high-quality content. So think about, what does a human want to search for? Is a human going to search for, the other day I was talking to my dog, walking my dog out in the weather, and people don't really want to read that. That doesn't make your content high quality. Try to summarize your content like a blog post or with a few sentences, and avoid falling into any kind of patterns. Like, in this episode, Ray, Dave, and Daniel talk about blah, blah, blah. In this episode, Ray, Dave, and Daniel talk about blah, blah, blah. That's falling into a pattern, wasting, especially at the top of your post, wasting valuable space for Google and humans to realize this is high-quality content.
I'm going to make that into a t-shirt. Google is becoming more human, right? The machine is becoming, what do they call that when the robots will eventually become, they call that, there's a moment there. It's a sci-fi term, but anyway.
It's it just slipped my mind too.
All right.
Yeah.
When you get it, let us know. Chat room, help us out. Some sci-fi geek knows what we're talking about. All right, did we talk about podcast directories?
No.
Get in them. Get in more of them, right? We say start at the top, right? iTunes is the biggest one. I'm kind of surprised, but it does happen. Someone will say, oh, I'm not in iTunes. Really? You have a podcast not in iTunes? All right. Well, maybe that's the BTR people, right, Dave? Maybe they're not in blog.
Exactly.
But we won't go there. Stitcher.
Or SoundCloud people sometimes.
SoundCloud people, right? So anyways, iTunes, be there, right? It's the 800-pound gorilla, whatever that saying is. Stitcher's becoming another go-to's place for podcasts, especially mobile. People have Android devices, so be on Stitcher. And Stitcher's actually doing more to optimize the ability to be found, I believe, in terms of reviews and ratings. And there are ways to game all these things. But the good thing to know is the more reviews, honest reviews and ratings you can get, it's going to help your show. All right. So Windows Phone BlackBerry still has a podcast library. I still get a lot of views from there. There's open source ones like Miro. Those are some of the big ones. Obviously, there are a lot more, and all of us probably have a list on our website for those. But get in more. There are more to be found. Dig deeper into our sites or ask us, and we'll tell you what some of the others are. But there are actually places that do this for you, right? So Rob from Libsyn, Rob Walsh, he has Podcast 411. There are like 183 directories listed over there. Whether they're all, I think they're all valid, but he tries to update it. But, maybe there will be some new solutions for that. But let's just say there are lists of directories that you can find, okay? And Daniel's smiling there. I think Daniel's up to something, but I don't know how much I want to talk about, how much we can or can't talk about that. Anyways, there are podcast directories of directories where you can find out where to submit your podcast. And this could be like, take a year, you can work your way through those. And every time you go to a new place, you're introducing yourself to a new audience who probably only gets their podcast through through that one directory.
Singularity. That's what it was.
The singularity. That's it. Google. It's happening. All right. We knew we'd get there. Oh, wait, Adam in the chat room. I think he did you get that from Adam?
Yes.
Daniel's, okay. All right. Thank you, Adam. All right, let's move on. What's next? Practical techniques for growing your audience. So that was SEO. It's passive. These are things you can do once. Those were things you can do once. Sort of forget about it, but let's get into things that are more what we're calling practical. They're active tactics. Probably something you're going to have to do on a regular basis. And the first one there is interview people. Dave, you like this one?
Yeah, you want to definitely, this is one of the fastest way to grow your audience because in theory, the people that you're interviewing should have some people hopefully following them and they are somebody in your niche that you want to talk to, so that will bring them to them. My advice is don't go for the big fish though, because interviewing is a skill because you have to learn how to listen, you have to learn how to have questions and kind of work on the fly, and so you don't want to go for the big fish because when you first start interviewing you will not be as good as you will be after your 10th interview. So start with small people and always be sure to, well, Ray, go ahead and talk about sound quality. I know you mentioned this at NMX.
Well, we did. We talked briefly about, making your interviewee sound their best possible. This could go from everything from sound quality, whether it's the way you're recording it, to helping them record better sound quality. I mean, if they have to, if all they have is their microphone on their laptop, at least make sure they're in a quiet room and they can get as close as possible to that laptop, right? There are small things you can do. And oftentimes when we're talking about quality, it's little tweaks that are going to make things better. Or, most people have a pair of earbuds like I'm wearing right here. It comes with my iPhone. It's got a little microphone in it, right? Or we could be talking about editing, right? So cleaning up the audio for your guest, taking out some of the ums and ahs, not all of them, but all these little things you can do to make your guest sound better will then probably be more likely that they're going to share it, right? Because the key here is that they share it with their audience. And you want to make sure that you are providing the tools for them to do that, right? So once you do the interview and you post it in your podcast, or if you do, you're doing an interview of them, it's good to be interviewed as well. But make sure they know, give them easy links to share it, make it so they can easily post it on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. So that's important.
Yeah, and you have to bring out good content from the interview too. There were a couple interviews I've been on, and the people who interviewed me in these separate episodes were really nice, very kind, fun. But the interviews, I just felt like we didn't really bring out much quality content. So I wasn't eager to promote them.
Prepare
to my
a little
audience.
bit, right? Do your guests, they're sharing their time. You should take the time on the front end to prepare. Hopefully you've listened to that person's podcast or read their book or whatever it is.
Yeah, one of the things I liked about, and I'm drawing a blank, in Cincinnati, the Bengal guy, I can see his face.
Nick SPNT.
Nick, yes.
TV.
One of the things I liked about Nick's podcast is his interview questions weren't the same old, same old. So if you have somebody who's been on a lot of interviews, go listen to those and then ask the questions that those people didn't.
When people want to know more about me, I'll often point them to that interview because he gets into like my high school, maybe my first like real job, like stuff that really hadn't been brought out before. So now it's sort of like this resource. I don't have to create. I just say, hey, go listen to this interview with Nick, and it's going to give you a whole different perspective on who I am. So good.
And ask the questions that your audience wants to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably means ask your audience what they want asked, maybe ahead
Yeah.
of time, right? That would be
Yep.
nice. Awesome. Get interviewed. I kind of hit on that. We don't have to go deep into that. It helps to be interviewed. This is sort of the same concept the other way around.
Yeah, in the chat room, Craig asked about what's the best way to start interviewing, or we could extend that to being interviewed, Skype, Double Ender, Google Hangout, anything like that. I think we'd probably all agree whatever makes it easiest for the person that you're interviewing and yet gives you the highest quality possible. If
It's this decision tree I sort of kind of go down, right? Because I start off on my show, our shows, we often talk to podcasters. They're set up for it, right? They're set up for good recording. So, hey, I throw it out there. Can we do a double ender? Great, we can. Take Skype's out of it. And then we just go down the line. Skype with a decent mic, Skype with a not so decent mic, Skype on a phone. Work down the tree. See what's easy.
Skype on a phone. You'll hear Scott Johnson on my podcast coming up. Skype on a phone sounds a lot better than I thought it was going to sound, because he was at a place where he had to turn off his computers, and Skype on a phone was like, wow, that's Skype on a phone? So it's not a bad option.
Yep. So work your guest down the tree that's easiest for them, and always looking for those small things you can do to make it better. But the key is to get the interview.
Skype on a phone, the sequel to Snakes on a Plane.
It is just as scary. I think it's probably just as scary. All right. So related to that, it says be an awesome guest, right? So you want people to promote their appearance on your show. Make sure you're being a good promoter of someone else's show when they have you on, assuming they've kind of done a decent job. I'm not going to lie. I've been interviewed more than once where it's like, did they hold a microphone up to the speaker and then record that? I'm like, I'm not going to share that very much, because it's really bad. It's really bad. And so, yeah, it does help. Whether that's right or wrong of me, it's kind of the way it's going to go. All right, what's next? We got be an awesome guest, create more content. I don't want to create more content. I created 5 episodes. That's going to get me 1 million views. I'm done.
Well, this comes from the idea that when Todd Cochran does this sort of state of the podcast space address each year for the Podcast Awards, he talks a little bit about these certain findings. And because Todd Cochran is CEO of Raw Voice, Blueberry, he has access to a lot of stats, and he can see what's working in this space and helping people grow their audience. And one of the things is creating more content. That doesn't necessarily mean more podcast episodes, but it could. Hey, here's a guaranteed way you could double your monthly downloads. Do 2 episodes per week instead of 1. Doubles your monthly downloads, guaranteed, or your money back. But that monthly downloads are really a meaningless number anyway. That's why I throw that out there. But if you want to grow your audience, produce more content. It doesn't have to be podcast content. It could be a podcast bonus that you have just on your site, or it could be a video on YouTube. It could be a blog post. It could be all of these things. So maybe like you podcast on Monday, you blog on Wednesday, and you do a very short, simple YouTube video on Friday. If you have some kind of trifecta like that, hitting all 3, then you can grow your audience a lot faster.
Yeah, and the caution here is to don't think, oh, I have to grow my audience, so I have to do all these. Do what you can do, right?
Right.
If you think you can add video, and if you've got that time slot, I like YouTube a lot. We know all the stats, right? Second big search engine, blah, 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 right? Google. But, how do you turn your podcast into a YouTube video? I'm not necessarily talking about just, some people take the audio, put up a picture, and post it on YouTube. That works once in a blue moon. I'm not a big fan of it. If it's what you want to do and it works for you, great. But I like find the 2 minutes inside your 30-minute or 60-minute podcast that would work well, that's visual and could be turned into a unique video, right? I'm sitting here doing this podcast. If I should do a video about the microphone I'm holding. Some people want me to get a new microphone or a microphone stand, but I have one right there. It just doesn't fit this microphone. But I could do a short video on the ATR 2100, I probably already have, and that would be great additional content. And I get a lot of people, I ask this question on my email sign up. How did you find me? Real simple. And I get a surprising amount of people saying YouTube, even to unrelated content. You'll be surprised. I do DSLR video how-to videos, and people love the Podcasters Roundtable and the other stuff they find there. So don't assume what people like. Make what you can and what you think the audience might like, and then you'll eventually figure out what that is. So another way to add more sort of distribution channels that aren't necessarily even podcasting.
Well,
But on the flip, go ahead, Dave.
Well, the other thing I want to say, when we talk about adding more content, more quality content. So if I put out an hour-long show, because I've got enough time to put out an hour-long show, and I said, well, I'm going to put out 2 hour-long shows, but I don't have enough time to really do that quality, you're just making more you're making more mediocrity content, and more people are going to find you faster and realize that you're not that good.
I'm going to jump in right here from the chat room. Addie from the chat room, she says, have a user-friendly website, ! And I'm quite sure we cover that somewhere here, so we'll breeze back over it again. But she says easy domain. That's a good, something easy to remember. Maybe even grabbing a few extras that are the misspellings, right? The common misspellings that people might make might be something good. And links to your social media pages of can I easily find your podcast on your website, right? She says she hates when she has to spend time trying to find these things. And we know the internet is fickle, right? They come to your site, they don't find what they need within a couple seconds, they're gone, you may have lost that person. So that's a very good point.
And Daniel, I interrupted you, so whatever you were going to say.
Actually, I wanted to throw this one to Ray, because there's a flip side to this. Instead of producing more content, in some ways, maybe we should produce less?
Sure, right. Instead of, it says, we have a tab, a little bullet point, it says create less, promote more. Is that what you're kind of referring to?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, well, it's weird because I think we've all talked about how promotion of your podcast can take more time than the actual podcast itself, right? You record a podcast, what do you do with it? You could let it sit there and sort of try to get organic traffic, but it's probably going to take work to grow that show. So maybe your time is better spent not producing a 3-minute YouTube video that'll take you an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to finish if it's really well done. And it could be better spent promoting, right? So getting out there, do you have a Facebook page? Hopefully if you started one, you're using it. So a lot of people will start up all these different distribution channels and they'll sort of abandon them, right? So maybe you should spend more time going out there. And like I said, when you do interviews, link up with those people, have them promote it, do the follow-up. So promote your content more. And you guys probably have great ways to do that, to promote more and create less. Dave, what's your favorite promotion? Well, we're talking about all these are promotion techniques, but when you think, man, I just started a podcast, what am I going to do? What's the first thing I'm going to do to promote this podcast?
For me, it's Twitter. I'm slowly growing more and more into Twitter. And then lastly, you got to find out where your audience is. Who do you want to listen to this? And start figuring out where they are, because that's really, those are the people you want to listen. And
yeah, you could create more and promote more, but if you're spending all your time promoting somewhere where people aren't really listening, that's
right.
a problem too. So it is important to find out where your audience is. Back in the day, as Dave would say, I can't do it as well as Dave, but
back in the day.
Hey, forums, we'd get out to the forums, we'd answer questions, right? Not necessarily just saying, go check out my podcast, You can still do it today. Google Plus communities rock. And if you're active and helpful, people will naturally gravitate to your profile. They'll see your links. They'll be more interested in your content, blah, blah, blah. So that's a great way to do it.
You could also consider either joining or creating a network. This is something I do that's been very successful in growing some of the podcasts on my network, Noodle Mix Network. Check it out at noodle.mx. And it depends on the network and how a network is formed. But generally, when people ask me, should I start a network, generally my advice is no. But once you get past that, oh, okay. But if you get past that no, then we can start talking about good ways to have a network, the structure of the network, responsibilities and such, if you're going to join a network or start one. But what you get with the network is a greater potential to leverage a bigger audience. Like, if you've been watching Podcasters Roundtable much, you've seen me wave my podcast award around. I could not have won this podcast award if it wasn't for having the podcast network that I have, Noodle Mix Network, because it wasn't the audience of the one single podcast by itself. It was the audience of all of our podcasts wanting to promote what we do. So if you're part of a network that has some kind of theme that fits together and people are good at cross-promoting each other, it can be a great way to grow your audience, because people will start to hear it more and more often. They'll hear, oh yeah, this one podcast host keeps recommending this other show on the network. Or if you start another podcast promote it to your current audience. So it's kind of like a network or a club, or it brings audiences from all kinds of places who will follow you just because they like your content or like what your network stands for.
Yeah, okay, we're halfway through and probably only maybe a third away through our list. So we will keep buzzing. But again, podcastersroundtable.com/NMX14 will give you this list because it's certainly more than we can cover here. But we'll keep going. I've got update your branding just real quick. I've heard that just changing your album artwork could bring in a whole new group of people because, you start to see the same album artwork over and over. It doesn't catch your eye. You sort of glance over it. Maybe a new artwork or update your branding would attract, it's more fish. It's a new shiny lure, right? But, I wouldn't take too much time to do that, but it's just something to think about. Consistency, right? Very hard. I think we talked about, Dan, you already hit on that. Twice a week would increase, would you say double or something like that?
Yeah, it doubles your monthly downloads, but monthly downloads is meaningless. The audacitypodcast.com/monthly downloads. Read more about that.
Yeah. And it's consistency in content. The trifecta is consistency, I guess bifecta. Consistency in content, consistency in schedule.
Yeah, and this is one of the harder things to do. Certainly for me, it's very difficult, but consistency, how can we be more consistent, Dave?
Well, there are things you can use, like I use Feedly, where I go out and have every blog that I read about podcasting or new media or marketing or things like that. I have all those come to me in one place. Feedly is an RSS reader, so it saves me time. And when I find something, I can actually save it or tag it. And then I basically, when it comes time to do my podcast, I go back to Feedly, look at what I've tagged, and determine if that's going to be in the show or not. So it's an easy way to have content coming to you, because that's one of the things that can really help people burn out, is if it becomes harder and harder to create the show.
Jason De Filipino, or if I'm saying that right, probably not, in the chat wants social proof of our own stuff. So I won't cover this too deeply. I won't go into all our individual stats and everything. You can get in touch with us. I don't think any of us care about sharing our stats. But Podcasters Roundtable has seen, here's the thing with these. Don't get overwhelmed. These are not something to go and do all of at the same time. Pick a promo tip here that you can probably handle easiest. Go try it and work these in. I always say grow as you go, right? This doesn't have to be done in one day. So grow as you go. Add on to your podcast. And these are things you can do all the time throughout your podcast's life. Okay, that'll grow your show. Podcasters Roundtable, before this talk in January, from about like September through up to the talk, I ran a little test. And we had John Lee Dumas on for a round, and we broke all the records, right? I had him promoted. I took his own methods of promotion, turned them back on him, and we did it. We literally went from hundreds to thousands. I think at the time we were having like about 800 downloads per episode. That was a combination between the live views, the YouTube archive, and the audio only. And then we peaked. We went over that 1,000 mark. So that was a little bit of a small test of what we're talking about. And that was utilizing just a couple of these strategies, which is interview someone, have them promote it. Those are strong. Dave talked about how this is probably the biggest one that's going to grow your show. So some of these will grow them in larger chunks. I don't think any of these you'll grow in one massive chunk. It's possible you could be found. Everyone gets found once in a while and you get a surge. But again, this is all chipping away type stuff. So hopefully, real briefly, that's a little bit of social proof. I'm not a big fan of that term, but that's what that is. Let's move on.
I've got a couple actual percentages that I'll share on different points as we go, but some things where I can say, this bumped my audience by this much.
Perfect. There you go. More social proof. Now I sound like an entrepreneur blogger or something.
Well, speaking of being social, think of ways that you can make shareable content. Like we talked about earlier, content that's such high quality and is so engaging, entertaining, or helpful that other people will want to share it. Think about this. Everyone on the internet wants one of two things, or maybe both of these things. I know there are lots of philosophy things that say there are 5 basic needs of humanity and all of this stuff. I see it as 2 because I'm a guy. I like smaller numbers. One is people want to be helped. The other is people want to be entertained. So look for ways to make your content either helpful or entertaining. If you can do both, then you have a really good win. And something that I've done with the Audacity to Podcast that has helped grow it even more in the last year is a couple things. One is I did some Google searching and some Google research to find out what are some things that people are searching for. One of those things was podcast hosting, was very high in the list that people search for podcast hosting through Google. So I made a podcast episode about the best podcast hosting solutions. I released that episode. It is one of my most downloaded episodes. I think it's number 5 in my list of most downloaded episodes, more than twice the number of all of the normal episodes out there, because it's such valuable content and something I designed for people to share. Also, some of the things that I've been doing recently are find questions that people are asking or issues people are facing, answer those with a podcast episode, go back to that person who asked the question, share the answer, and if they ask the question, then probably other people are, so it becomes shareable too, especially when you show that you answered the question in this very shareable way. And I've seen that on a couple of my episodes, that's increased the downloads on a per episode basis, increased the downloads on some of those by 10 to 20%.
Yeah, and similar to that, and something we already hit on, you talked about going back and letting people know, or helping people and then letting them know, hey, I answered your question. I have live in your niche here, and this is a big one for me. Pretty much, I podcast about podcasting because that's what I spend my free time doing. I'm in the podcasters community. Even before I podcasted professionally as a career, right? Did production. All I did was consume podcasting production content. That's what I enjoyed. And so I did a show about what I enjoyed, and I live in my niche. I'm on the podcasters community as a moderator. Twitter, I'm at Podcast Helper. So I really spend my time in my niche. And so participating there, answering questions, and doing all this stuff with sort of asking without asking for something in return is a great way to promote your podcast. I think somewhere in here we have things like have your podcast link in your in your email signature, or this is related to having your own domain. If I have thepodcasterstudio.com, that also allows me to get an email, which is ray@thepodcasterstudio.com. And what am I doing every single time I send out an email to anyone about anything? Promoting my podcast. So that's pretty cool. And there it is. It's right below live in your niche, email signature. Do check it. Gone. All right. Find non-podcasting platforms. Dave, we've kind of talked about this. Breeze over this.
I'm still trying to find it in.
We got submit to social networks like StumbleUpon, Pinterest. These are non-podcasting platforms, sort of. I mean, Pinterest, if you post all your podcasts to Pinterest.
Yeah, I know, Daniel, you had some success on StumbleUpon, right?
Yeah, I see this quite regularly, that whenever I publish a post, I use my own sharing buttons, which, by the way, helps add to the social proof on my own post. So when people visit there, they see at least some shares. But I submit all of my stuff to StumbleUpon, and as soon as I do, I usually see about a dozen clicks come through StumbleUpon in real time that come immediately after. And StumbleUpon is one of my top referrers, especially for entertaining content. So my Clean Comedy podcast and my Once Upon a Time podcast do really well on StumbleUpon. And Reddit has so many subreddits for just about anything out there, so that can be an interesting place. But any of these places, well, StumbleUpon is kind of anonymous. But a place like Reddit and Pinterest and Google+, those aren't so anonymous. So when you submit stuff there, people see it's you, and if you're always submitting only your own stuff, then they'll mark you as a spammer.
What I like is the tip right underneath that, which is more chances to be featured, especially if your niche isn't covered, right? So if your niche isn't well covered on one of these, you may be feeding an audience that is looking for your content, and that platform might be more likely to feature you in there, or however they're featuring people. So that's kind of cool.
There is a Google Plus community for the TV show Once Upon a Time, and I'm a moderator in that group. And I would post my podcast episodes there, but I hadn't for a little while because I was just thinking, I don't want to be posting my own stuff all the time. And then I got around to posting another episode that I thought was pretty important. And several people commented back saying, oh, thank you so much for posting. I was wondering where you went, why we weren't seeing new episodes from you. And it was in this community that was around this niche. They were looking for that content, and I was the only podcaster in that group sharing, at that time, sharing my own episodes, so they were enjoying it.
Yeah, this next one is good, and this is maybe, like, you said interviews are the best way. I don't do interviews on my show. Well, maybe you can do this. It's the interview without the interview, and it's talk about influencers in your niche. Dave, do you want to talk anything about this one? Let them know you talked about them, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the having John Lee Dumas on that show. That started by Steve Stewart writing a post called
yes.
the John Lee Dumas effect.
Right, and that's
which,
why that's awesome point, Dave. Sorry to interrupt. That's what we do here.
Go ahead.
That's cool. Here's another one of those tips we integrated into that sort of little case study. And you're right. It didn't start because we're like, hey, let's go out and get John Lee Dumas and he'll boost our show. One of our people in the Roundtable community wrote an article about John Lee Dumas, didn't do an interview, and that kind of sparked the whole thing. Proceed.
Absolutely. So, and you know, when you write about things that are people already talking about, I know your mom said don't go play in traffic. I'm here to tell you, in terms of podcast promotion, you want to go play in traffic and write something that people are looking for, and then again, you can say, oh, by the way, if you like this topic, here's my podcast.
And anything like that where it's inbound marketing, where you're out there bringing people into your website, that's where the point, I forget who it was that said it in the chat room, but that your website really needs to be well to convert people, because if you're bringing them to your site, they consume your content and they leave without ever seeing subscribe on iTunes or subscribe on Stitcher, without seeing your links, without seeing how to connect with you, without being able to sign up for your email list. And I'm not saying spam them as soon as they hit your site with this, but have these links on your site prominent, because if they just come, read, and leave, then that's not building a loyal audience. That's a one-time thing. But get them to engage with your content, link to your other stuff, link to your subscriptions.
And that was actually Addie, and she says, LOL, when I hear back in the day, I hear Dave's voice every time. So you've corrupted her brain. You're inserted right in there.
Well, I know Daniel talked about the one podcast was getting a lot more downloads. One of the things you can do is go back and look at your stats. I know somebody in the chat room had asked Daniel, hey, why are you going to more theory-based stuff and away from technical stuff? And so one of the things you can do, and Daniel, you can answer that question in a second, but you can look at your stats and kind of see what is more popular. Are there any topics that seem to always get more downloads than the others? So that's something you can do, and you can actually do that. You can actually Google, like if you look at your stats and you're like, wow, this one is just a huge spike, you can actually do a Google search and put, I think it's link and then a colon or whatever, your website and that address, and it'll show you who's linking to that web page. Because you may be mentioned on a forum or a Google Plus group or something and not know that you're being talked about.
People are going to ask what that is, so podcastersroundtable.com/NMX14 has the little formula thing that you can put in it to find out what that is. Know your audience. We talked about that. So there are surveys you can do, know who's listening, right? So exactly what Dave, what you're referring to there is at some point you gain a little bit of an audience, right? The first day your mom listens, second day your girlfriend listens. Hopefully by episode 20, there's people you don't know listening. And what's cool is at some point you will get to know them. That's really cool. So get to know people who are listening, right? Make that connection online, eventually maybe offline, and you'll have a listener for life. I know it's the coolest thing. When I first heard like my email read on a podcast, I was hooked. It's like, these guys this is it. I love these guys. So, but at some point, episode 20, you may be able to see how the audience wants you to shape your content. Don't let them completely control it. Have your own voice. But Dave's mentioned, hey, I got a spike on this episode. There's probably a reason this content is something people are really enjoying, right? And then we've got...
well, on that, to answer both on that and to answer that question in the chat room about me, some of the content I've been covering recently, I'm doing this series, Challenging the Podcasting Assumptions, is because I was noticing a pattern in emails I was receiving from people that they would say something like, hey, I heard you, Ray, Dave, Cliff, all of these people talk about this particular thing, but that was 3 years ago. Does it still apply today? Or people would be saying, do I really need to do this? Because there are all of these other things. So I thought, hey, let's do this series, and it answers these questions in addition to producing what I think is some great content.
Let's go in relation to that. Have you covered, Jason asks, he has an app for his podcast. Does anyone else have one? Have you seen any traffic bumps? Have you covered, do you really need an app? I think that was one of the things you covered, right, Daniel?
Not yet.
Okay,
That's on my list, though.
Then let's elaborate on that. What do you guys think? I mean, if you listen to Rob or Libsyn, he says this is an awesome way to grow your show. Apps. Do any of us have an app? Dave has one he doesn't know about, I think.
I have one. What's interesting is the one day I was in iTunes and I typed in School of Podcasting, and oddly enough, my podcast did not come up in the list of the top. It was like a little bit off the center, so you had to scroll to the right to find me. My app, however, was smack dab in the middle of the screen. So that was when I went, maybe this app thing, I should make it go free and really promote the heck out of it.
And apps can cost up front. It seems like every day, that's obviously a bunch of hyperbole, but people are coming out with new ways, more affordable ways maybe for you to get an app for your podcast. So that's something to be on the lookout for, but it is going to cost some money. So it's sort of this this trade-off, right? Do you have the money to invest in your podcast versus is this actually going to bring people back in? Sure, it's another place to be found. There are certainly a lot less podcasts in the App Store, I guess if you want to say that, or maybe your content is not as represented in the App Store as it is in the podcast store or a blog, right? So there may be benefits. It's definitely something to look into, especially in the day and age of mobile.
And we did a whole roundtable about that, too. And we had Rob Walsh and a couple other people on the roundtable with us, both for and against having apps for your phones or for your podcasts. And generally, though, think of it this way. How easy is it for someone who's never listened to a podcast to subscribe to a podcast? Then think about how easy is it for someone who has a smartphone or a tablet to install an app. That's reducing the barrier of entry.
And how many people have installed an app versus downloaded a podcast? App wins. All right, so let's move on. Yeah, awesome point. Podcasters Roundtable. I wish I didn't. Dave will find the number. Put that on Dave. Okay. Dave's like, what? If not, we will get the number. We covered it. Let's go down the line. Now, this next one, consider a highly targeted ad, right? So, again, now we're talking about things that may cost a little money. An app, an ad. I would say with YouTube, they let you create this ad for free, but it's more of a channel trailer. And we know YouTube's not podcasting, but we've talked about that. How about a Facebook ad? I think Facebook ads are really cool, at least in terms of potential, because you can drill down so deep into who you're targeting. So you could spend like $5 and maybe reach that exact person you're looking for. And it helps if you have a podcast, if you know who you're talking to. Dave mentioned know who your listener is. If you don't know who your listener is, how are you going to pick all those sort of demographics to choose in Facebook? Facebook knows probably more about you than your mom does. So you can go down the line. You may mention in your Facebook post that you're a podcaster or have a podcast. You can find people highly targeted. So a Facebook ad, I think you could probably try it for $5. I'll say, I don't know if this works at all, but I started to create an ad because they had some promo, stopped. A day later, I got an email, hey, we see you started to create an ad. Here's $50. Go have fun. I was like, hey, I don't know if that works. And it certainly probably won't work a year or two from this, but try it. Create your ad, see what happens. But that'll give you some idea of what you can do with an ad as well. So check that out. I don't think there's sponsored tweets and all that stuff, but these are just things, ads are something you can consider. Anyone want to say anything else about?
Think about even advertising to people who consume your competitors' shows. And we've talked about competition and community and stuff in previous episode of Podcasters Roundtable. But if you have a Facebook page and you know your competitor has a Facebook page, you can target your Facebook ad to only go to people who like your competitor's Facebook page and not your Facebook page.
Yeah, and I saw someone actually kind of is doing this on YouTube. So before my channel plays, because I'm opted in for ads, pre-roll, this ad pops up and the guy's like, on this channel, you'll learn. So he does, instead of saying, so it looks like it's my channel. It looks like he's clever, kind of annoying, but clever. So anyways, we talk about, we call them gray hat. I don't know if they're black hat. There is something deeper in here. Daniel got fairly tricky. I don't know how deep you want to dive into it, but there are things you can do. Depending
I'm looking forward to sharing that one.
Yeah, depending on your own podcasting morality, I don't know what to call it. But all right, let's move on. Thank people will shout. What?
One of the things I'm passionate about right now, this next point, is get more ratings and reviews, because the ratings and reviews in iTunes and Stitcher now really help your rankings in iTunes and Stitcher. Those are the things, especially iTunes, that help your iTunes ranking the most, is not just the ratings that when someone gives you 5 stars, 1 star, whatever, but if they write a review for you. And you need to make this easy for people to do, like give them a /iTunes link. And make sure that you're not asking them to do this all the time. Ask them to help you after you've given them the content. But if you want to learn more about how to get iTunes reviews for your podcast and how to get the reviews automatically delivered to you whenever you get a review for your podcast, go over to mypodcastreviews.com. There's a free ebook there that you can check out with some tips, and the service launching, I hope, tomorrow by the time of this recording.
It's only appropriate that Daniel gets as many promos in a show about promos as possible. So I feel like there should be a little. You could play like Podcasters Roundtable Bingo or something.
Right.
Like someone's already been bingo. Go ahead, Dave.
Do not let me derail the talk. But there's something we could do. I'm seeing more and more people buying reviews. That could be a whole other roundtable.
Whoa. Yeah. Now we're getting the gray hat. All right.
Yeah. So we'll keep that for gray hat maybe. But yeah, send me your review, a screenshot, and I'll give you my book. Kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay. So anyway, move on.
Sketchy.
Here's the thing, though. Apple does not prohibit that. They don't. I mean, they may personally look down on it, but I have asked Apple, do you have a problem with this if people incentivize their audience to get more reviews? And they said, no, this doesn't break any of the terms and conditions. So do what you want with that.
Here's an awesome. So in the chat room we have Daniel. Hold on for this. Ortego. So like it's like a mashup of me and Daniel. It's a little weird. I like it. Ortego. I've never seen my name with an O replacing the A. Very cool. But he says, Daniel, is that ethical? And he's referring to something else. But ethical questions, whole other roundtable. And we may have talked a little bit about that. But in relation to that, Dave found it. Kudos, Dave. PR24. The link is in the chat room. I will put it in the show notes for this episode or this round. And so check it out. Or you can go to podcasterroundtable.com and look up round 24. That looks like it says, should your podcast have its own app? There we go. All right. Let's move on. So ratings, reviews, thank people with shout outs in your podcast. We got to start buzzing down these, man. We're not on a time limit. What I love about podcasting is it's our choice, right? You want to do 2 hours, you do 2 hours. I am sitting in the sun, so it's getting a little rough, but let's sort of hit these, less stories and more. Let's just shout out.
We have here I hate to always hear people say, I only have 30 people, because the good news is embrace it when you're small and really get to know those people. I've really been trying to do this the last couple months, and the next 3 episodes I have are going to be people from that have contacted me, my audience, that said, I think I have something to add to your podcast. And so I was like, all right, time to put my money where my mouth is. And, I'm finding people to come on my show. So I'm embracing my community. And so we all want bigger communities, but embrace the ones you have. And those people will then become your disciples. I don't know if that's the right word, but your cheerleaders to go out and spread the word about your show.
I feel like, Dave, you should have broken a song somewhere. Bring your guitar next time. Bring your guitar. Go find that little cookie. Dave did intro our show with a guitar song once. That was cool. Include your audience. Audio feedback in your show. Daniel, you do this?
Yeah, I give people several different ways that they can provide feedback, and I've talked in the Audacity to Podcast before about ways that you can get your audience to send you feedback as well as different channels they could use. But when you include people in the show, like you guys were saying earlier, that you feel a part of the show and you get excited and you want to tell other people, hey, listen to this. They read my voicemail. They read my email in here. And because they're including you, you're more excited to share it with other people. And that goes into word of mouth. But it also shows that you care about the people, not just yourself, when you're including people in your show.
Addie in the chat room, she's getting a lot of highlights today, but she says podcasters should use Instagram more. I'll say Mommy's Cocktail Hour uses Instagram. Awesome. I love it. They do these little postings and even use the video. I had to comment the other day. I was like, that is a brilliant use. It was like video, but it switched between like just flashed images of, it said something like on the next episode, we'll be doing this. Anyways, it was really cool. So yeah, it's another channel, right? Another channel. What's next? Include your audience, leave feedback for other shows.
Yeah, that's an easy one.
Yeah, Dave's 5 and 5. I left Dave feedback back in the day. I left Dave feedback.
Yeah, schoolofpodcasting.com/contact. If you just tell me what the last 5 podcasts you listened to, not necessarily your favorite 5, but what the last 5. And people love that. It's a great way to find new podcasts, which we've kind of been talking about, word of mouth. and it's a way to get you involved, and I use that to then start a conversation with that person that sent it in.
Right. And so in that case, for me, I was already listening to Dave's show. I loved it, so I was always tuning in. I got in trouble at work for it, so you're welcome, Dave. But I was able to be exposed to an audience that I wanted to be exposed to, right? I wanted to get into a group of podcasters, and Dave was one of the first podcasts about podcasting. And so I called into the show, participated, it was fun, but also got a shout out with my website at the time, which was completely different. But that's a great way to, I always talk about reinventing the wheel. Don't try to build something and then bring everybody. Go to where they already are, right? And that's a great way to participate in someone else's show who may have thousands of people that you're wanting to get in touch with. And again, Podcasters community on Google Plus, and there's other podcasting communities on Google Plus. Those are fantastic ways.
And of course, whatever your niche is, if there's any kind of events around those, try to see, put in your application to be a speaker. That's a great way to promote your show and let people know, whether it's at PodCamps or local meetup groups. It's a great way to, again, go to where your audience is.
Yeah, PodCamps are awesome because they're oftentimes anyone can speak. You just got to apply. It's a good way to get your feet wet if you want to eventually speak at something like NMX or Podcast Movement, which will all be coming up here in Dallas in August. And local meetup groups, man, I went from podcaster to professional podcaster because of local meetup group podcasting. And so it's a great way to interact with the people who are also doing what you want to be doing.
Yeah, and even if you can't make it to be a speaker, just going to some of these events where other podcasters will be, like Podcast Movement. There will probably be an affiliate link for Podcast Movement. If there isn't, there should be, Ray, on podcasterstudio.com. But if you go to these events, you can get to know these other people who might be so impressed by your personality or by what you're wanting to do that they might just willingly want to mention you in their podcast, because they might say, hey, I met this really cool person. So and don't go just to promote yourself, but go to meet other awesome people, and you'll benefit from that.
Yeah, and as much as I love just going and having real conversations, I guess there's a benefit to having your elevator pitch, right? At least be able to talk about your show in a couple sentences, right? It's because that may be all the introduction you have with somebody. So it's a good way to start up a conversation. If you're shy and don't know how to talk about people, or talk about people, if you don't know how to talk to people, talking about your show at a conference where other people are in that niche might be easier. So a great way to get to know people. Newsletters are pretty 2001, aren't they, Daniel?
No. Newsletters are still really, really effective.
Yeah, they're probably one of the more powerful things.
Yeah, it's Michael Stelzner calls it the oldest form of social media.
Yeah. Well, look at these other social media platforms. Facebook, I can't look at this. I posted this today to my Facebook page, which has, I think we're around 800 people at facebook.com/podcasthelper. And I think 25 people saw the post. So Facebook, there's a finger on the, you know what I mean? Come on, man. You can't reach your audience. With the newsletter, I think you're more likely to reach the people who actually have said, hey, I want to see the content, right?
Yeah.
And they're much more call to action friendly, right? Because if you have a link for a review in iTunes, or subscribe in iTunes, or wherever you are, sign up to your newsletter. Of course, they already did that. They can click on the link, as opposed to hearing your podcast and you say, hey, can we have a review in iTunes? And it's like, oh yeah, I'll do that later. Although I will say now, there is something to be said for even the podcast app has been updated. So it actually, in your show notes that it displays in the description, the links are clickable, right? So,
actually, it's even more awesome than that.
Right.
I thought it was only URLs, but hyperlinks. So if your text is hyperlinked, it's clickable.
So this is something you can do. Hopefully people aren't leaving you reviews while they're driving down the road, but they can click on links. So we've knocked down the barrier for participation a little bit more, right?
Yeah, and be careful how you use your email list. I experimented for about 3 weeks with mine. That I've been promoting this list for a while, and I experimented with automated RSS emails once per week, just telling people about the latest episode. Now, when I first started my list, I never told them they would receive just notifications about my latest episodes, and people started unsubscribing. And I realized, I've kind of betrayed some trust here, and I didn't set up the expectation for this. So because they're not expecting this kind of content for the list, I'm going to segment this, make it a new opt-in list. So I've disabled sending automated RSS emails. Now, if that was the assumption and expectation of my list, that would be fine. Like Michael Hyatt's email list is just RSS updates from his website. And people know that when they sign up. But be careful how you use your email list because you don't want to betray people's trust.
And a little callback here, Craig Whelan in the chat says, don't overdo shout-outs and fan comments. He said he heard a podcast because they had sort of delayed getting their shout-outs out. It was like 20 minutes of boring shout-outs. So grain of salt, right? Moderation is key always with all these tips. And sort of what Daniel's saying is be careful how you use the list. I think what's most important is start building your list. Even if you don't have a strategy for how to use it right now, start collecting your emails. I certainly started my list way too late, but it's not too late. I mean, that list is now pretty strong, and I don't send out very many emails at all, but it is a great way to communicate with your audience and then help them do things that may grow your show, whether it's a reminder of a show that's going live or something you already recorded or review or call in feedback, all that stuff that's going to help grow your show, which is, of course, what we're trying to do here. So what else we got? So we've hit the hour, but we're a podcast. We do what we want. No one's going to turn us off. There's no producer guy going to come through the door. I'm doing good if there's a producer that comes to the door and stops us, but we'll keep going. Let's push on. We're going to have to, let's pick up some of our favorites. I'm going to start skipping stuff here. So we got email list. And again, podcastersroundtable.com/NMX14 to see the ones we are going to have to skip over. We got host giveaways. Giveaways are always sort of this tricky thing you can do, whatever. Network cross promotion is good. If you have a network, you can promote your show across your content. Send bumpers to your favorite podcast. You guys stop me. Here we go. I'm going to start reading. Stop me when you get to one you want to talk about.
Here's the one I want to talk about.
We found it?
Yes, this is my thing that overnight literally octupled my downloads, my audience, my subscribers overnight.
Brown
literally. I bought my competitor's domain. Now, you could see this as either something really sneaky and underhanded, or you could be potentially a savior to the audience of that competitor. In my case, it was another podcast that had stopped podcasting, and people were looking for that kind of content. They enjoyed that kind of content, and I was buying that domain to point it to my own content, which was similar, and I made a welcome message. I said something like, hey, in case you're wondering, how'd you end up subscribed to this podcast? Here's how, all of this stuff. And literally overnight, when I bought that domain and I redirected the RSS feed to mine, I octupled my audience. Now, about a month later, it fell back down because people started unsubscribing or their iTunes subscriptions automatically paused, whatever the case. But even though it died down after that, still the number sustained as being more than 3 times what the audience was before I bought that domain. So it was still helpful, and the people, about half of the people I gained, well, actually more than half, or whatever the numbers were. Anyway, about 4 times the audience stayed afterward.
I think the important part there for growing your audience is this is a think outside of the box, right? Change your paradigm. This is, what else, what could you be doing that may not, and I think the important part about that is, Daniel, I don't know if you mentioned, they had stopped. They had gone away, right? It's not like you just stole it. Like their domain expired and he got it, right?
Right.
And they were still podcasting. They're like, what the heck's all our audience? Where are they gone? No, they were gone. The pod faded, I think, done. So that's important, but look for those opportunities. Opportunities are there. So let's keep going. Find a niche that has dabbled in giving advice about your subject. Example is a podcast about marketing that has done an episode about how they produce their podcast and get them to link to you. So this is sort of cross-promoting through other podcasters who may have a show. Maybe they've done one episode on how to podcast. Well, then maybe they can link more deeply to your show for a more in-depth explanation about how to podcast. But they're not interested in getting into how to podcast niche. So something to think about.
Similar to that, create some kind of gateway content where you're bringing people into your little circle, and then you can promote your other stuff. Like entertainment podcasts grow very quickly. If a new TV show is coming out, maybe you want to do a podcast about it. And in that podcast, you can tell people, by the way, if you enjoy my perspective, I also host this other podcast. So you're building a completely different audience for a completely different show, but that audience can spill over into your other show. So build something that might be very popular that by itself could help you reach however you define success, but can also spill over into other areas.
Yeah. I have replied to every comment. On my YouTube, I'm fortunate. My YouTube channel just crossed 1 million views, and I get comments, at least I get a lot of comments on the channel. I answer every single comment. YouTube's made it a little harder to do these days, but every comment I can answer, I answer. So you work hard. The point is you work hard to get these people, get people to participate, to engage. Don't breeze over when that happens. That's a very high sort of threshold, right? You could have 100 people listen, one person might comment, and that's actually probably a pretty good ratio. So make sure you give that comment and take the time to give the feedback to that person who reached out, because it's part of that building that listener who's going to stay and also promote your show, right?
It's also social proof that you appreciate your audience. And there's nothing worse. When I worked in customer service, the worst thing you can do is send out a survey and get people's responses and then ignore them. So if you get a comment, you're like, hey, I would love to hear from you, and then they go, hey, Dave, this is what I think about that, and it just sits there and crickets. They're like, well, I guess that's the last time I'll leave a comment.
Yeah, and I think it's important, for me personally, it's important to do this as quick as possible. I talk about engaging in the conversation while it's still relevant. I got to say, this drives me crazy. I see people ask for an urgent question to be answered in the Google Plus community. I need help. They get 5 responses. I don't see their thank you or their response or what happened. I don't see them for a day or two, if at all. It's like, man, you asked for urgent help, people supplied it. So engaging in the conversation while it's relevant is important. And, people could comment and you come back 15, 20 days later and people are like, what was that about? And you sort of lose that engagement. So being quick, not to mention people are surprised. They're still, every time I answer a comment within a few hours, they're blown away, because that's not the standard for YouTube. So do something that people aren't used to sort of getting on a regular basis online, I guess, which could be commenting on other people's content, right? Go out there and engage in your audience's content. Find out what they're doing. Become active in their community. So that's also very important. We hit down here at the bottom. We are actually getting close to the bottom. So get your own podcast app. We talked about it, Podcasters Roundtable 24, and whether you really want to do that. Create audience promotion tools. This is kind of cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can do things in PowerPress, and like you can actually turn on a feature to where people, just like on YouTube, can get an embeddable link. So you could put that there. I know in the past I've made a PDF for my audience to print out and hang at like music stores. And Daniel?
Yeah, also make web banners for them. Something not that just says the name of your podcast or is just the cover art for your podcast, but it could be something. Think of something that someone would be proud to share. So it could be like in my case, since I have a podcast about the TV show Once Upon a Time, I could have a badge that says, I'm a oncer and I listen to Once Podcast, and that links to my site. So that's something that my audience would want to put in their place. As well as think about analog products like buttons, business cards, flyers, t-shirts, anything like that. Cool swag that your audience will enjoy, that for one thing could possibly make you money if you sell it, or this could be stuff that you give away, but it can help promote your podcast as it gets your branding out there.
Yeah, and Ken Blanchard, who's in the chat room, thank you for the kind words, Ken. I think as the comments are flying by here in the chat room rocks. You guys are killing it as usual. I saw him have a brief conversation with Dave, business cards in library books, right? But I think he mentioned bumper stickers, right? So, you can get things like stickers made cheap. I wanted to get stickers for Podcasters Roundtable for this last NMX, just didn't get a chance to get them out. Making a round sticker is harder than a square sticker, but anyways, we will get there. But everyone that appears on this show, once you are, and I hope that's everyone that's in the chat room, will eventually be on the roundtable. That is the goal of this show. And you, at that point, you're a roundtabler. Word I created, but you get to say I'm a roundtabler, maybe, and if you make 10 roundtables, you get a T-shirt. So there's a caveat to that. But if you watch past roundtables, you won't make 10 roundtables, or maybe I will get T-shirts. We'll see. But the point is, yes, involve your audience, give them something to promote, but be proud of. Foursquare does this well. There's the gamification of apps, and I got a new badge, right? It's amazing what people will do. for some free stuff. Some people will stand out all night in the cold to get a free VHS. No, they don't have those anymore.
I think there's actually
Free chicken
plugins.
sandwich.
I think there are plugins that you can put in, and the more comments you leave, you get badges on your website. I think
Yeah,
there's a
they-
WordPress plugin for that.
Gamified websites. All right. All right. Yeah, but that's cool. Like something genuine, I think is very cool. And I think who does this very well with, I think, is it the Adam Curry and Dvorak, and they sort of, the people, they have an amazing donation model. And they make these people who donate producers of the show. They give them shout outs on the show. I think it's No Agenda Show.
Yeah, you're a knight of the No Agenda Roundtable.
Yeah. So, and the audience loves it.
$1,000. It's
Yeah.
$1,000 to be a knight, and people do it every single show.
There you go. Lots of cool stuff you can do for promotional tools, audience promotional tools. But yes, the embed from the PowerPress. PowerPress is a plugin for WordPress. If you're running your website on that, people can take your player and embed it. They could say, I was on this episode, and easily embed it. And that goes to helping people share your content, and maybe even SoundCloud. This could be a good use for SoundCloud. Not necessarily, I don't think any of us are on the fence of, or on the use SoundCloud to host, but that's another roundtable, which I think we've mentioned before. We've brought that up. But SoundCloud does have some good uses. Makes it easy to put a nice player in Facebook natively, easily shareable. So there are some things you can do to help people sort of embed, take your player, and promote your show. So create an embeddable banner. Is that much different? What's a banner, embeddable banner, Daniel?
Well, like an image on your site that other people can embed, like I mentioned earlier, and some sizes that you could use in case you're wondering. Just look up standard sizes, which are 125 by 125 pixels, 300 by 250, 468 by 60, 728 by 90, as well as 160 by 600. And in case you missed those, just look up IAB banner sizes, and you'll find sizes like that and some other standard sizes, but those are the most common.
Cool. Tweetable text. Anybody? Are we still doing that?
This is getting popular in some of the top podcasts, like Michael Stelzner, Michael Hyatt, Ray Edwards. Several people are doing this where they say, visit mypodcast.com/love to tweet a link, and they're using a service like Click to Tweet, so that when you visit that link, it auto-populates a tweet for you that might say something like, I'm listening to such and such podcast. You can do this kind of stuff on your website very easily, embed a tweet button or a like button or things like that share a custom message. But it's giving people the power to promote your content for you and make it easy for them too. And I think that is getting more popular. And there are others who, like Eric Fisher from Beyond the To-Do List, will hyperlink certain great takeaway points from his interviews with guests about productivity. And he has a click to tweet link next to that. So you can tweet that nice little point. So you're adding value to your audience by sharing content from someone else's show.
Right. And so I guess maybe bringing up the rear here, one of the last, because we already talked about creating physical analog items for people to share, cards, buttons, t-shirts, whatever. Sell less. Less selling, right? Is this maybe preventing some growth? Dave, any comments on selling less?
Yeah, there was a guy named Joe Vitale. This was like 2006. He was the hypnotic marketer. He was in the movie The Secret, where if you just think about 1 million downloads, it will come to you. And Joe came out with a podcast, and it was all about Joe. I'll just leave it at that. It was Joe. Here's why I'm great. Here's why you should listen to me. And I'm Joe. And nothing for the audience. And so at the time, PodcastAlley.com was the big ratings thing. And he shot right to #1. And everybody's like, "What's a Joe Vitale?" And then the next week, he was completely off because he was just nothing but selling. And so nobody tunes in for an infomercial on purpose unless there's absolutely nothing else on.
That goes back to, you might have great presentation, great production, but horrible quality. Content quality, that is.
Yeah, and I mean, and you may have something to promote, but again, take this stuff in moderation, right? So don't just dump on top of people all the stuff you have to promote on one episode.
My closing tip, my last tip I'll give here is ask your audience. Don't ask them too much. Don't try and sell them too much and try and make them tell other people how awesome you are. But if you want your audience to do something, ask them. Maybe make it just one thing you ask them to do per episode, only 2 things instead of 20 different things. But ask them to retweet you, ask them to share your podcast, ask them to click on your share buttons, ask them to leave ratings and reviews, ask them to send you feedback, anything like that. They're not going to be as likely to do it if you don't ask them to do it.
Yeah, and some people are uncomfortable with that, but you do have to ask. They might not even know these avenues exist, right? They might not even know, never have thought to leave you a review. So maybe that's your one call to action. And it's a good closing tip, because in closing on the page where we have this outline, I talk about how most of the items listed here create some kind of word of mouth, which I mentioned in the opening. And it tends to be the most effective way of reaching new podcast consumers, people who might want to listen to your show. So get people to talk about your content, and you will see growth over time. And so I think that it's really important to nudge people along. Don't push too hard. People will find your stuff if you have great content that tends to rise in the search, but you probably will need some help from your audience, and don't be shy to ask for it. I think it's a good tip. And so in closing, Dave, do you want to throw out one more tip? Although we covered a lot of tips. So,
well, just kind of going back to the bare bones, the very first thing is you need to make content that people go, oh man, I can't wait to tell so-and-so about it. That's start there, because having buttons and banners and tweets, I forget who said this, but it was a marketing book. They said good marketing of bad content will only let the world know you stink quicker.
Yeah, and I think my biggest tip is don't stop. Right? I mean, even if what if you've missed a week, or you've missed 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Try not to do that. Try to be consistent. We talked about the key of consistency, but we hit one. Dave liked that one. Dave, what did that spike in your
there's one true way to make your downloads go down, and that's to just stop.
Yeah.
So as long as you don't quit, if nothing else, you're still there, and you're still trying, and you might reach one more person.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can't do any of these other things, or if you don't have time, don't drop them all. Don't attack any of this list except for the part that says create good content, right? Because you will grow over time. If you consistently create good content, you will grow slower. These are little tips when you find you have time to work on your show, grow as you go. Add these in one at a time and try them and see what works, and that'll help grow your podcast from hundreds to thousands. I'm not talking about 50,000. I don't think any of us are here. We can talk ad nauseum about numbers and what is a good number. It's different for every podcast, right? So if you have sort of hit that limit, I've been able to reach 820 people. Well, let's figure out how to get you to 1,200 people. And then their ceiling might be 1,500 people, depending on how niche you are. But these things can help you climb that ladder literally one step at a time, because they're going to be small steps in most cases. And maybe you get lucky. One of these things, you'll do that interview, or you'll be on that show. That'll give you a nice little bump, and you'll pop up to the #1 spot on iTunes. That has happened to me for like a brief moment, and you'll jump back down. There's the new and noteworthy thing that everyone always wants to get into. That's also for another show that's been covered plenty. But these are all tactics you can do to grow your show. But keep creating content. Don't stop. Keep podcasting. So as we go out, Ray Ortega, podcastersroundtable.com. Check that out. Again, NMX 14 for this. I will add this there, which you'll get the embed of the video. You'll get the audio-only version, which is also podcast. So you can go to iTunes and subscribe to the audio-only version that comes out hopefully a couple days after each round. And you can listen as you drive down the road. But I want to thank everyone who did listen and watch live. Again, if you are watching live and you're in the chat room, it's a good chance to get on a future round because we know you're out there. We know you're interested in participating. We know you have something to say. So speak up. Let us know your opinions, because we are just having podcasting discussions here, right? It's less about the how-to, and it's more about the what-ifs, the whys, the how-comes about podcasting, and we want all opinions. That's what makes this fun. Take what you like back to your show and use it. So hopefully, I think, you've got probably a better presentation than the people at NMX got, because we have more time. We've had time to think about it. And you know what? I will say most of these are still relevant from what is now almost a year ago, right? So these are good tips, okay? And so make sure you get a hold of any one of us if you have more questions about any tip that we talked about, or just podcasting in general. And to do that, Daniel, where can they find you?
I'm at theaudacitypodcast.com and on Twitter, the Ramen Noodle. And I've got my new service coming out, mypodcastreviews.com.
Yeah, I think I got that one in 3 times. But it's a new, so we'll give it to you. I'm at Podcast Helper, of course. I love Twitter. Dave said he's over there more. He's digging for a tweet I sent him, so he'll get there. But I didn't send it to his primary location, which is what, Dave? Where can we get a hold of you?
On Twitter, you can find me at Learn to Podcast, and you can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. And to see all my contact information, go to schoolofpodcasting.com/contact.
Fantastic. All right, chat, you rocked it. Dave,
Absolutely.
Daniel, this was unique. This is just us. No new roundtabler, but that's what we do. I want to experiment with the show, and I think it's been a success. So thanks, you guys, for basically recreating. We spent a lot of time creating this list, so I'm glad we got to use it twice. It was awesome. All right, till next round, go to Podcasters Roundtable, check it out, and we will see you next time. Wave, everybody.